We're live. Okay.
Get match data, right?
Yep. Let's give him a couple minutes so that people can come in. I'm going to send a message here. Guys, if you're in there, just let us know if you're listening, if you can hear us. If you can hear us, if everything is okay, if you can see us, if the image is breaking or if the sound is breaking, let us know if everything is okay. If you're in there, because you can send messages in the comments. Please let us know if everything is okay so we can start. I'm gonna send another message in the group here. Okay. Guys, if you're in there, let us know if you're listening. Let us know if the sound is good. Let us know if the image is good. Send us a thumbs up if you can listen to anything, and then we can start in 1 minute. We'll start, and whatever happens, just please let us know if everything is okay. If the image breaks or if the sound breaks, just let us know. Okay, guys, we're good here. We're gonna start, and let's go. Gonçalo, good evening. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome to your own space. And guys, today we're gonna talk about match analysis with Gonçalo Pinho. Gonçalo is head of performance at Tigres in Mexico, and we're gonna talk about this. It's an interesting topic, of course. All of these topics related to GPS are, are bottomless pits, are rabbit holes we can go down. We don't know what's the best way to analyze it, and that's what we're going to try to do today, is try to discover what information can we take from GPS trackers in relation to match analysis. Because in training, I think there's a little bit more consensus, however hard it still is, but in match, sometimes we tend to think that the match is a match, but there's a lot of information that we can take. There's a lot of decisions that we can make live, and this is one of the things that we're going to try to do here today with Gonçalo. Gonçalo, can you just, for the people that don't know what you're doing right now, can you just tell us a little bit of how you self-presentation, your background, your academic background, your professional background, and what you're doing right now, please?
So it's a pleasure to be from Mexico to Portugal. No. A very quick presentation is that I'm myself right now working in Mexico in the football club Tigres, which is a club that is fighting for the championship usually, and playing also in Conca Champions. And I'm here for more than a year now. My role here right now is the head of performance. So basically, I'm more in charge from the lens of the club of all the health and performance of all players of the club, first team, men's first team especially. And my background is, started with you in more practical areas, with rugby and also Estoril Praia in football. So I've been 5 years in Estoril before I moved here. And the academic is the normal bachelor's in sports science, master's in human movement, and trying to finish my PhD for a long time. Never-ending journey. Hopefully soon or not so soon. But football is busy. Football is hard to keep up with.
Everybody knows.
So, no, but definitely it is something that my research topics and my dive has been a lot of the GPS analysis, match and training. But match has been definitely one of the most exciting things to analyze for the future. To be fair, because I think is where we didn't do much back then, and right now we can see there is a lot of new things that we as a sports science can actually do. Basically, help the team.
Listen, one of the things before you start, in depth into match analysis, one of the things I wanted to ask you, this is all of these are personal questions as well, because I honestly want to know the answer, is how did you dive into the GPS stuff? When did you get the breakthrough? When did you start working with this and developing your own stuff? How did it happen? Was it like a long process? Did you decide, okay, now I'm gonna dive into this and just gonna analyze all of the GPS data? How did the process happen?
So I think as a strength coach, it's the GPS is basically the way that we have, as everyone knows, the easiest way that we have and the easiest access that we have for the physical load, right? As any strength guy, when I was more focusing on strength related programs, I would always calculate the set reps load. So it's basically doing the same thing as we do for any other sport, any other exercise. When we're training prescription, the GPS is the same tool in the end, is trying to understand and calculate what we are doing. So as soon as I joined or I moved to football, I understood that, of course, I cannot prescribe training load based on sets and reps, and cannot have the restoration as a normal strength coach would apply, right? So the first thing that we had available was GPS, and that's where all began. So I have this tool. It's an awesome tool to understand every second what my player is doing. So that's where it all started. Like, how can I first see what they are doing, and then see if we made some changes that would have a better physical outcome or a better player availability, performance, freshness, whatever the nomenclature we want to use or say, but basically trying to use the training loads, what we see, what we can measure, and in order to make the best decisions so the player can perform better in the match.
This is what we're all looking for. But yeah, in regards to match analysis, because of course, again, this is a rabbit hole, but it's different to analyze what happens in the match in regards to what happens in session, because in session you have a plan. In the match, of course, you have a plan, but it's harder to stick to the plan because you're going to play against another team which also has a plan, and etc. etc. So the first question, because you can divide this in many topics, I think that before we start, we want to set the tone here, and I would go for the basic question that I think that we should see answered before we start this. Are there different variables? Because I was talking to Katarina a couple of days ago about variables to analyze in GPS, but in the match, are we looking at the same variables, or do you think that some variables are different in match than in session?
So, well, the variables, if we go for any GPS brand right now, even there was a trend. I remember some years ago, the trend was like a GPS brand would say, we have more than 200 metrics. You can measure more than 300, whatever. That was the number. Like every brand that would say, I have more metrics, it was looking like this is the brand to go. Yeah. Right now, I would say most of the practitioners are relying on 4 or 5 metrics, like the normal metrics, which are the distance at different speeds, basically, which can be relative to their own max or just absolute values, and then acceleration, decelerations, or change of speed, right? And sometimes people use the more, let's call the high metabolic load,
the composite variables.
Yeah, it would be one that is, I see it very, very disseminated among coaching staff. It is somewhat useful when you talk to a coaching staff, but if we dig deep as sports science practitioners, it is much more complicated if you want to really get to the truth of what he's saying. But as a coaching staff, because as a coaching staff, they just have a number. They compare apples with apples, basically. So for them, it works fine. But when we try to understand really everything that we are measuring and what we want to say, if it's the exact truth behind what we are, our statement, that is where
my question about I'm not sure if you can answer this, but in regards to player load or high metabolic load, is the calculation the same in every brand? Like, is there a consensus in the way to calculate these values? Not really.
No, definitely not. So that's the thing. So first thing is player load is a totally different thing than high metabolic power load. So they are totally two different variables. Player load is a variable based on the accelerometer that you have on GPS. So it's usually it will started as a need indoor quantification because the GPS didn't work indoors. So
they use the IMU, right? The inertial movement unit.
Yeah, exactly. So that's was the answer that the brands use. Like, oh, you were gonna use it inside. You have player load, so you can see. So theoretically, player load is almost 100% correlated with total distance. So that's a simple way for someone that has not access to outdoor. They can use player load as the same way they would use total distance.
Right.
Meanwhile, high metabolic power is it depends. So there are several ways to calculate. It start, I think, it start the metric with Christian Wozniak. I do believe he was with Pompeo. Were the first guys, at least that I'm aware of. I might be wrong on this one, but the first guys many years ago that I've read something about it. And basically, it started as a calculation which tried to have the speed change as a metric as well. So basically, the reason was if you change speed at different entry levels, the cost is different. So of course, we all know if I change my speed, if I change my velocity from standing still to 10 kilometers per hour, is very easy and almost everyone can do it. But if I do the same 10 kilometers per hour from 20 kilometers per hour to 30 kilometers per hour, there are many people who can even perform that change of speed. The cost and the demand is very different. So basically, very, very summarized, there was many ways to try to have in one whole metric all the decelerations, calculations, besides the distance and the velocity. So it's an interesting metric for sure to comprehend the total energy expenditure per se, or physical cost. But sometimes it's hard to fully understand.
Especially if each provider gives you a different metric, it's hard to compare stuff. I mean.
And some take into account body weight, others don't. So, yeah.
So my thing, so we're back in the same that I was speaking with Katarina, because I think it's what we all agree on is that we're going to stick to the basic ones. Still some discussion, which is not the topic here, but some discussion on which is the threshold for accelerations. For instance, if you don't have if you cannot have more than one threshold, which one do you use? You use 2 meters per second squared, use 3, use 2.5. But anyways, we're gonna stick to the basics, which is what we both think it's what's most helpful, which is gonna be total distance, high speed running or high speed distance, sprint distance, accelerations and decelerations, and basically it's gonna be this and maybe a composite of some of these. Anyway, so now that we've taken this into account, I would start with the first question, more related. Well, it's also a question and a discussion as well, which is more related to match analysis per se, which is how do you segment periods? Because all of the coaches have this problem, which is, oh no, they're losing performance at the end of the game. They're losing performance at the end of the first match. How can you measure this? Do you segment by 15-minute periods? Do you segment by 10-minute periods? And do you analyze performance in periods? Because there's a lot of variables here that you need to take into account. You cannot just, segment into 15-minute periods, but on the last 15 minutes, maybe it was offensive organization, right? So tactically wise, they were all stopped. They were all playing in one half of the field. So you're gonna assume a decrement in performance? No, you have to take game phase into account. So how do you split the phases in order to, or if you do at all, because maybe you don't. But what's your opinion about splitting the phases on each of the halves so that you can check for decrements in performance?
So let's say my match report per se has several pages, and each page basically is a story. So the first page of my match report is a timeline story. So basically, I start with the team total distance as a whole, and that is the first thing that I think is very important when we try to understand the match performance as a team level. Many people get it wrong right from the beginning, because many people, what they do is they make an average of the variables, total distance, high speed running, acceleration, wherever. They make an average and they say, okay, we're going to remove the guy that didn't play above 80 minutes so we can have only the starters. Well, if you do that, you potentially, what we already did is the game that didn't have so many subs is the most demanding game, because usually the subs are the wingers, which will have the most, typically the highest speed running, and usually the guys that get out are the ones that did the most because they are tired, right? So theoretically, if you already don't count the subs into your team report as a match level, as a team level, sorry, you would already have a very biased data that didn't explain the full picture. So the first thing I would suggest for sure is make the sum of every player and divide it by 10, excluding goalkeepers. This basically, there are always 10 players on the pitch. You just
Unless you get a red card.
Yeah, but even so if you have a red card, you can make a small calculation. But the thing is, you have divided by 10 if you want to have an average per player. But even I would say you can have the whole number, just sum everything what everyone ran as a whole, and then you have, okay, this match as a team we ran 100 kilometers.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. People need to understand that what's important is to understand the total amount of movement that the team made in the game. Exactly. Independent of which players made what movement, you want to see how much movement the team made in a whole game. But then there's another problem, which of course I know the answer to, but of course I want to know your opinion, which is after the new rule, I guess it was a Qatar World Cup, the rule with the stoppage time and with the extra minutes, with the I don't know the name in English. How do you say the extra time after?
Yeah,
the compensation time. The compensation time, right? So now you have games with 97 minutes, 98 minutes, 101 minutes, and you have games with 92 minutes. So if one game has 10% more time, of course there's going to be. You cannot compare this game with 101 minutes with a game with 92 minutes, because there's a 10% difference. So what would be the solution here in your opinion?
Very simple. So even my first report that I sent, the first line, literally the first line is the sum of everyone, and then it's divided by the time. So you have the thing per minute. So you have, imagine you have a match that is 11 kilometers per player, so 110 basically divided by 10. And then if there was 100 minutes, it would be 110 meters per minute. So you have, basically I would have the sum of everyone variable, so total distance sum, and then right beneath I would have the meters per minute, accelerations per minute, high speed running per minute. So you would have volume and intensity. And then what I would do is the same thing. So always the sum of everyone, first half, second half. Then I have 15 minutes blocks. Then I have per minute. So basically I have a graph that is a line, because there, when you see the match as a line, as a per minute line, you can see clearly where were VAR, where were a stoppage. So there is very clear where the game intensity dropped. And then as you have the minute that happened and you can access the video, and I will discuss that with the technical staff. So it's very, very interesting to understand why those minutes were very intense or not. So basically we do that. That's my first timeline. So it starts at the whole match, half, 15, and 1 minute. So
when you do the 15s, how do you take into account again the extra time? So if you go by 15 minutes, the
plus
final...
45. So I have 0 to 15, 16 to 30, 31 to 45, plus 45, and then 45 to 60, 61 to 75.
Plus 45. Oh, so you go for those extra minutes. You just go for how much? Okay, got it. Yeah, and then so you start in the second half again. 45, 60, 60, 75, exactly. 75, 90.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And the first, and then per minute is just I have the first half, and then I have the second half.
Right.
Just just a graph.
But of course, this leads us into another question, which is, of course, you can see visually what the intensity that the game or where the game was going physically, but how can you actually assume a drop in performance capability? Because let's say in the first 30 minutes, there was, again, all transitions. And then in the last 15 minutes, you got organization. You got offensive and defensive organization, right? So you got a more broken game. So of course, you look at the data, you look at the numbers, you're going to assume, okay, these guys, they dropped in performance. They didn't drop in performance. The game just was a more broken game. So how do you deal with this? How do you analyze? How can you make sure that if that was a drop in actually performance capability or just a part of the game itself?
So
you understand my question?
Yes. The first thing is that right now there are many tools that we can use to combine with GPS. For instance, Sports Code is a very known one where you tag the whole match. So basically you say that from this time point to this time point, there was offensive organization, transitions, and so on. And by that you combine with the GPS data, and then you have the sum of how many meters did we run under offensive organization or defensive organization, and then you have the meter per minute per each phase. So usually I split offensive organization, defensive organization, offensive transition, defensive transition, and also tactical schemas. So what do we call free kicks, basically?
Yeah. It's set pieces in English.
Yeah, set pieces. Yeah. So basically, that's the 6, because we have ours and opponents. When the offensive, when we say
offensive set piece, defensive set piece.
Yeah, exactly. So the six possibilities besides the downtime where the ball is out. So we don't.
This, in my opinion, this is one of the most important things, which is, again, what you just said right now is to cross the game phases with the GPS data and get an intensity value of the game phase itself per game. It's the best way to make sure that if you're improving or if there was a decrement in performance, because if you get a game with a lot of transitions and a game with less transitions, of course, the players are going to run a lot less in the game that has less transitions. So this is important for coaches. Understand that you need to cross the tactical characteristics of the game with your physical data. So don't assume that your team is worse just because you ran less on the full 90 minutes. This is important. You need to understand why you ran less. So if you can divide by game phases, because there's obvious distinction in game phases. When there's transition, everybody runs either to attack or either to defend. That's why it's called transition. When there's organization, there's a lot more stoppage time and players are more fixed in position. And of course, in set pieces, of course, there's also kind of a break. So you need to analyze inside of each of the game phases all of the metrics that Gonçalo just said. You need to check for total distance, high speed distance, whatever, and also the time per minute, because this is the key here. Because one game is going to have more transitions or less transitions, and if you have what happened by minute of that type of phase, then this is actually one of the best ways, in my opinion, and I'm sure in yours as well, to compare what happens between games. Would you agree with that?
Yes, the thing about I think sometimes we try to evaluate physical performance as as an isolated characteristic per se, but let's face it, football will not will never be a max out sport. In what sense? The one that demands the most physical, the match that demands the most physical match will not the best match, and neither the worst. So the players are not always having to run the highest as they can. So it's very tricky when we try to evaluate performance by the match itself. And I'm going to give you an idea that happens, which is there are technical stuff that during offensive organizations they try to do much more passes. Let's think about it, for instance, for what was the tic tac from Barcelona, which is very ball intensive, but the players don't move that much. So that offensive organization tends to be or could be with a meter per minute
Lower,
than,
yeah.
yeah, than a team that is doing more direct gameplay, game style. So even though there is a good comparison between matches because usually it's going to be the same coach and the system can be the same. However, if the technical part of the match is going well, sometimes is a good variable that the meter per minute on the offensive organization is going down because the pass is getting better. The players know where to stand. They don't need to compensate so many meters to the left, so many meters to the right because they are already much more synchronized with the game model. So it's very tricky when we try
To
to
analyze
analyze.
this, yeah, match analysis is tricky.
Yeah.
That's why we're talking about it today.
So I would never suggest clearly like we did better because our meter per minute on any phase was higher. If not, for me, it's much more interesting to compare, for instance, while we are in defensive organization and I have a line of, let's call a line of four, and I have two central backs. And during of defensive organization, I have a big difference between my two central backs. So that will give me a much better insight of what is happening because in a more game model where defensive organization you have a very line that should basically go all together up and down, and when they go a little bit left or a little bit right they should move together. If you have someone with lower, for instance, high speed running, usually it's because when the line goes up that guy jogs
Lags behind.
and doesn't sprint and doesn't follow the line. So that could be actually a potential risk for the team if you get.
Yeah, but this is what you said is very interesting. But then again, of course, in the line of four, it's hard. In the line of four, if you have two center backs, right, it's hard to argue against that. But in a line of five, of course, the central defender is going to run less probably than the guys on the sides. So
But that makes no problem because you compare, in this case, you were comparing the central backs with central backs. The thing about it, and even if you compare the left and right, it's already more tricky because the left and right could be more related to how many phases, how many attacks did we have from one side against the other. The whole thing about it is, first thing is the coach has already many insights of what happened. And many of the things that we measure, they are not supposed to be all innovation or insights like different things that what happened. That would be very weird that the data is constantly showing us something different than what we are seeing.
of
That
course,
would basically say that, look, we are not able to visualize at all what is happening on the field. So basically,
of course, we can
usually
see.
the human eye is very good at
Yeah,
having
what you're just saying, we can see if a central defender is running in defensive transition. You can see if he lags behind. You don't need a GPS to tell you that, of course.
Exactly. But the thing is, when you are trying to see trends, when you try to understand the big data, when you have several matches, is where you start to fully understand the potential side of things because then you have to replace some guy and you know exactly what's the game profile, the physical game profile that you need in your game model, and then which kind of player that you might need. Because I used to argue a lot about the fact that is we see a lot of positional comparison, like, oh, I want to know what this position gives me and what the central backs give me. Like you design a training and then you ask, okay, but what is going to be the physical load of my wingers and so on. That is, arguably, you are already suggesting that the wingers are the wingers and they are like the same. The central backs are central backs and they are physically the same. And we do know and we do measure quickly that there are wingers and wingers. There are wingers that have a lot of high speed running in their legs, and there are other wingers that they don't have that possibility or that capability. So to understand clearly if your game model needs one more player than the other is always I always consider a very interesting discussion with the technical staff, because you have to understand what the technical staff wants. You have to talk to them, and sometimes I try to make like mathematical rules of what they want. Like, is the line needs to be always together, or can the guy, when you have the line, is the central back able, or is the command is that the central back attacks the guy that has the ball. That is already, I have several head coaches that says don't attack the ball receiver, just walk and run back, and the other ones say no, you have to get out of the line and attack. So that gives you different metrics, and then you know if the player is more able to do it or not. And of course, you, like I said, you start to make a physical game model, and then understand which players can fit your physical game model. And that, I think, is a very cool and interesting discussion with the head coaches from the physical side of things. Because the game will always have some physicality, that's for sure. And now, which players can play your game? Usually, of course, games that game models that are less physical are easier for players, but although those game models usually need more technical aspects. So it's a very interesting way to discuss those match analysis, physical analysis, with the technical stuff. And then, like I said, sometimes I had one coach that he wanted on defensive, he wanted that the winger would basically turn into a line of five, and it was supposed to be the winger to fill up that. And I had one that usually could be that where the ball is, so the winger where the ball is the one that needs to close. But I had another coach that said it's always one the left side of the winger, like always winger. So the team will have to basculate, and then.
So let me get this: in defensive, you get a line of five. In offensive, you get a line of 5.
Yeah. So that happens a lot. So a lot of head coaches have hybrid models.
Yeah.
Of course, because the game is a pattern more than a positional game, in the sense of the pieces are not always in the same place. But basically, what the pattern was saying is like, look, if we compare that, if it's always the same winger that needs to close the line in being 5, this winger needs to run much more than the other winger. And then we already know, okay, if you want him to also be involved into attack, then you already have a very specific physicality that you need from that guy. Because if that guy
you need a specific profile of player that can be able to close the line when it's defensive and then attack again after you get possession of the ball. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So there are that many wingers that could not make that physicality of the game for this game model. So the question was, is the position that makes the player, or is the player that makes the position? And in my sense, I think, of course, both match in the middle, but there are players that cannot do the extreme needs of a game model position.
And again, GPS values help you identify those.
For sure, yes.
This is something that people normally don't talk about, and especially in match. I say we, but normally what we do is as soon as you get a new tool, you look at the basics, and in GPS people how much this guy ran, and how much that guy ran, how much high speed distance. Again, what you're showing us here is that this is way more complicated, and there's a lot of interesting yet simple stuff that we can analyze to make decisions. Like you're saying, you're making tactical decisions. You're giving information to the staff, to the head, to the coaching staff, to make decisions about which players to play based on GPS analysis on a complicated model.
Yes,
Um,
and the good thing, and I believe one of the best things when we start to analyze the game phases and trying to have the game model into account is you can have feedback and you can give feedback for the training as well, because many things, or when we see the training intensity, usually the training intensity is a much lower pace. But we have to understand that if when we train offensive organization per se, if we do it at a very lower pace, it's the time to think about what is happening is much higher, and that's not entirely related to what happens in the game. So if you say to a coach, look, when we are in defensive transition, our meter per minute is actually 140 meters per minute as average, not even as a max. So not even as a most demanding minute as defensive organization. So the average of defensive organization, and this is my own data, is around 140, even
of
100
wait of
meters per minute.
offensive transition.
No, organization, just defensive organization. Offensive organization, usually it's lower than defensive organization. So defensive organization could be around 140 to 150. Offensive organization would be 130 to 140 per average. When you talk about offensive transitions and defensive transitions, then the position, for instance, it makes a big difference, because if it's a defensive transition and per defensive transition, we acknowledge that we were attacking and now we are defending. So we lost the ball. And who gonna suffer usually are the central backs, midfielders, and the full backs. Sometimes winger or not, according where the ball is. So if it's your area, but usually the striker walks back, and it's not so demanded. The winger of the other side walks back, so you clearly see on the game. So you clearly see direct ball after losing the ball, you see three guys in the front walking back.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about offensive transition, those guys are actually the ones that run the most. And when we're talking about transitions, we are already talking about the positions that are more involved in those transitions are more than 190 meters per minute. So those are more related to the most intensive, the most demanding periods that we already know that usually are around 200, 210 meters per minute. So offensive transitions, sometimes if we calculate it, could be above what is the most demanding period. And we have to understand clearly why, because the most demanding period is an interval from start to finish, 1 minute, where you run the most. When we talk about transitions, we are talking about 5 to 10 seconds, 15 seconds, even that too much, phase. So when you calculate, you sum 10 seconds, you sum another 5, you sum another 20, 15 seconds, and then you divided the sum of it by 60 to get it per minute. So when you get per minute, you can have those game phases with more intensity than the most intense period.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally related to what the period it is itself. So the question sometimes is, do we train during the week at any speed level? Even I would say sometimes to discuss with the technical staff, because the technical staff, many times they don't see the true value of the physicality per se. But if you think about the time that you have to make a decision, you are giving them the double time to make a decision compared to the match. If you are training offensive organization and they can receive the ball, have no pressure, don't have so much pressure, they can have more insight what they are looking. So
Which is not real.
Which is exactly so. The more or less, so those all of this is published. So the time that you have when you receive the ball as a striker before getting pressure is less than a second, is half a second actually. The time that you have as a defender is 1 second and a half, something. So, of course, then position based, they have more time when they receive the ball and to think and make a decision. But when you train, if you don't train with these game phases or intensity, you are basically downgrading the need of the cognitive technical aspects of it. And then what can you transfer from those trainings to match? It's then the real picture, right? Of course, you cannot always train at game intensity because otherwise the message is really hard to pass by because the players won't be able to cope with what everything is needed. But definitely sometimes I would say you do need to train at the game intensity. So it is a cool discussion to have with technical staffs. And when you touch those points, I think they do understand much clearer what the message or what we are trying to bring to the table.
Which now it's we're crossing information from match to bring into sessions because again, what you train to be able to perform in a match. So if you never train at the intensity that you're gonna have in a match, then you're gonna be undertrained for sure. So again, this is one of the things that we need to do with the GPS data is see what happens in match and how can you replicate or how much should we replicate this in the session throughout the week, of course.
But we have to think this is our responsibility because everyone does and everyone did, and what we call the most demanding periods. Most demanding periods are really interesting, really important, but many times we compensate the most demanding periods by analytical drills as intermittent training. So we're looking to a physicality aspect, only have the physicality aspect and don't bring the technical and cognitive load,
Yeah.
of which is that most demanding period with much more technical stress. So, of course, I do believe this is our, let's say, line of work, and we would be the ones that need to push the boundaries so the technical staff understands that those most demanding periods, they also need to be integrated with the exact moments where they happen. So you are basically training physical at intensity of the needs of the match. Many times we do compensate analytically because we are not able to fully
Replicate.
buy-in, no, more the buy-in of the technical staff. So many times we don't have the buy-in of the technical staff to create the drill library that they use together in the sense that let's have a moment integrated this. And then you end up with the session, you look to the values and you say in the end of the session, look, there are many things that we didn't hit. Well, better hit it now analytically than don't hit it at all, which is fine, which is a totally valid point. Also, I do believe that we would have, if we were able, we would have to make the step early and said, where can we train this during training? Integrated.
So you need to prepare beforehand. So this is again, this is one of the things that we were discussing before, which is when you have this session preview, you need to understand what can you change or what feedback or what condition is or what size of the pitch or what can you change in order for each of the session types to attain, the metrics that you want to attain in order to avoid just putting extra stuff analytically, which is what we all want is to get the biggest bang for the buck every time you do something. Want to get the most out of everything you're doing. If you're going to have to do tactical training, and then if you're going to have to do at the end more physical training, if you can do all in a row, you get more adaptation from that than if you do it separately. That makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you something else, which is, what about in match? What about setting thresholds for players? Do you set thresholds for players? Do you say like, this guy hit, 110% of his maximum sprint distance. Shall we take him off the pitch? Do you make decisions based on individual thresholds for players in the match?
During a match, as an isolated value, no, at all. Like
All right.
every match is different, as we just said. So, of course, what I do and what I would suggest is I have into account those values and look at how he's performing, right? Because if I see that he's reaching very high values comparing to his profile, and he's starting to walk back when he used to jog, he's starting to be more still. Of course, then I would try to understand and see. Look, this guy is getting much more tired than what was his pattern, and this is very interesting because the the per minute analysis is what can help you the most with it, because when you do a per minute analysis, if you see that the guy is already reaching very high levels of demands, and then you know that the average of his meter per minute, and then you can understand if his meter per minute is dropping. So you already know, look, if the meter per minute is dropping and he's already topping his normal values or even max values, of course, it's a good insight to be aware and trying to understand if that's going to be a need to change. Because when you analyze the substitutions, you see that at the 70-minute mark, the guys that go to the match, they end up with very high meter per minute in the beginning. So it happens. So there is a burst for sure. What I've now seen usually, there is a burst every 15 minutes. So if you analyze every match, it was very, let's say, would be very awkward or not so normal. Would be very not so, yeah, would not be so normal to see that the first 15 minutes were not the most intense meter per minute as a team level. That's the data that I have. Maybe it's my own lens that is giving me that, and there could be another data, but the data that I have definitely says first 15 minutes are always the most demanding of the match. And the subs that get in usually have the same pattern. So the first 15 minutes. So the subs definitely can contribute to an increase meter per minute. And that's why many times when I see that trend, you can see usually a very slightly downtrend from first half to the end of the first half. But on the second half, sometimes the line goes up. So
Goes up again, yeah.
yeah, so sometimes the intensity of the match is more demanding, more towards the end. And many times what is pulling the lineup is definitely substitutions, for sure. So, of course, it's very interesting to use it. I would always argue that we can be aware, but not only take that decision based on that. Now, I would say, there is a metric. Let's put it a different way. There is an analysis that I do like, which is not so normal. Let's put it this way, which is the meters, basically the minutes. More than a meter is the minutes spent at most demanding periods, because this is one of the things that I've seen, which is much more individual. And by individual is the work rate of the players. So there are players that have a much higher work rate meter per minute. And by that I say, let's cut down, as I said, let's cut down into thresholds. How many minutes does a player perform during a match above 150 meters per minute? As we already knew, like even 150 meters per minute is the average of defensive organization. So even according to the same positions and guys on the same position, that's where one of the things that I see, there is a lot of player profiling. So this is one of the metrics that I see the most difference between players. There are players that can cope with 150 meters per minute, and then you have players that can cope with 150 meters per minute. And by that I say, let's cut down into thresholds. How many minutes does a player perform during a match above 150 meters per minute? As we already knew, like even 150 meters per minute is the average of defensive organization. So even according to the same positions and guys on the same position, that's where one of the things that I see, there is a lot of player profiling. So this is one of the metrics that I see the most difference between players. There are players that can cope with more than 150 meters per minute, like 30 minutes. So the match has 95, and they can be 33 minutes above 150 meters per minute.
Let me ask you,
Meanwhile,
sorry, let me stop you and ask you a simple question there. Is there no correlation between a player's average high speed running in the match and a player's normal number of minutes spent above most demanding period threshold?
not most
Is there
demanding.
is zero correlation?
I would not say zero because of course there is always going to be the R is not going to be zero, but definitely I would be very surprised. I did a couple of those analyses with my own data, so this is not published data, but there is in my own data no correlation. So definitely it would, if there wasn't a correlation, it would be even inverse correlation in my own data. And that's because the work rate is the ones that can keep the movement higher. Basically, when you have those high-speed running guys, so those sprinters, they sprint and they walk or they jog. You have the powerhouse, what we call, usually it's going to be the midfielders. So the central midfielders usually it's going to be your powerhouse. But I have sometimes the striker as well. So depending again on the game model that we have, if the technical staff asks for our striker to do a lot of pressure, that guy, I had matches which the guy that spent like the most amount of total distance and even the most periods above certain thresholds of most demanding periods or meter per minute, so more than most demanding periods, the correction would be thresholds of meter per minute, could be a striker, could be a midfielder, so, and even fullback, definitely. So no correlation.
So you think there's more of a correlation in the number of minutes spent above a certain most demanding period threshold than there is about looking just at total number of high speed distance or sprint distance? So you think this would be more related to game performance than the total values of thresholds, of the regular thresholds?
I would not, like I said, I would not say game performance. I would say profiling of the player. Because the thing is, or the question has to be, does your technical team want that your midfielders, for instance, go get the ball, drive the ball? So do they want, or if they are much more direct game style, they don't need those powerhouse in the middle, per se, one thing. So it's always matching. The thing is, if your game model needs some guy in the middle always making runs, you need a good guy that is able to keep those work rates very high. So you can evaluate that. And my sense is much better on the minutes spent above certain thresholds
than just looking at high speeds.
Yeah, than just looking at high speeds. Because, for instance, those minutes, only one or two could be related with dead ball. Because nobody's going to start sprinting when the ball is out. Unless, of course, if it's a corner, then you have the central back going back. But it's and even so, it's going to be a jog. It's not, let's think about it. What is 150 meters per minute? So if we go box to box, that's around 70. It's go in, go back, and a little bit more in 1 minute. So that's 150. And even if we calculate the 200 and something, 210, that's already going in, back, and in. So that's when I try to explain when I'm talking about, look, my players in a minute did 30 times box to box.
Right.
So that's, if I say my player did 30 times box to box, it's in a minute. So then you have already one work rate.
I understand, of course.
So that's, for me, that's a good interesting
way to analyze it.
Yeah, and then you can, because then you relate this. Because then you relate this to the training itself. Because 150 meters per minute it's If you just run, it's easy. But in training, it's very hard. I mean, if you go analyze the most demanding periods per drill. If you go analyze most demanding periods per drill, so the most intense minute that you run in a drill, many drills don't reach this threshold on 150, 160, 170. So I'm telling you that many players spend more than 30 minutes on those intensities. And in training, we don't even reach
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the when I try to explain to the coach, like, I'm not even talking about high intensity scenarios per se, the max, because one thing is, we need to reach 2 times above 90% of max speed, 95% of max speed during the week. But that's a very mechanical approach. And it's true. I mean, there are several studies already reflecting the need of exposure to high intensity max demand, basically. But here I'm just talking about the game itself. The game is going to require you to spend those energies, those demands with acceleration. So we are talking about 150 plus. So here would be where high
plus accelerate plus decision making, right?
Yeah. So definitely, I do believe this is one interesting for me. It's been helpful, and I can tell you this is where makes for me the most difference. Sometimes we look to the most demanding periods, and we know the most demanding periods of each player. So I can tell you, I have data. I can say out loud. For instance, I have in a match, I have the guy that did the most demanding period at 223 meters per minute. So the most demanding period player, the player that...
The most demanding period, you're talking about 1 minute, right?
Yeah, so the most demanding period, 1 minute, most demanding period, taking account all the players. So this guy did 223 meters per minute. Now, how many minutes in total he spent above 150? Like I said, so this guy spent 11 minutes, but he's the one that has the highest most demanding period. But now let's say I have another guy that has the most demanding period 199.
But then spends 30 minutes above 150.
Then spent 33 minutes above 150, and even 12 minutes above 175. So, like I said,
it's a profiling issue. You may need one type of guy for one situation and another type of guy for another situation.
But for me, the interesting thing is we many times we profile the players based on only 1 minute. And that guy is the guy that does the most demanding period. But that guy does that once in the match. The other guy that does a little bit less, and let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna take into account 1 minute, it's, let's say you attack. Let's say you have a full back, you attack, and then you lose the ball, you come back, and then you attack again, and you lose the ball. That's 1 minute there, and maybe happens once in the game.
Yeah. So I do believe the volume that you spend above certain thresholds to give you a better profile of the player. You know what you can count on the match. You know if you're gonna cover more meters. Even for midfielders, then this is a good discussion. You talk, look, this guy, he's not gonna clean out the space. So if you think as a painting, he's gonna cover a lot of your central and having a lot of
the heat map. You can imagine the heat map. Yeah.
The heat map. No, he's not gonna cover so much. But you have to understand what he does in a much smaller radius is still good enough for you. Go for it. But that's your profile of the player. So this is a good discussion with the technical staff, for sure.
Listen, this is one of the most interesting things that I think that you're developing is this view of how can you analyze worst case scenarios and how can you create thresholds and just not looking at the basic data, which we're already going deep into more complex stuff, which most GPS providers won't even give you. So you have to take this stuff into yourself.
I could keep going on this kind of potentiality analysis that we have. Of course, we are mixing a lot of what we call by physical and the aspects of contextual although I do believe that's also under our umbrella. What I would say is, for instance, we can basically measure if the guys are running forward or running backwards. So sometimes the argument is, oh, this guy runs a lot of runs, so a lot of high speed running, but it's always forward. Then it's not an argument. So it's something that you can help the team. And while going very, very deep onto the possibilities of stuff, and I think there is a lot of discussion on small-sided areas or small-sided games. What do they are? How they? So it's very cool when you try to understand the demands of those small-sided games and what happens in the match.
Yeah.
And clearly, you could. This is quite tricky. So you could potentially try to understand how many phases of small-sided games happens in the match when you are stuck. But even basically, you could do one thing, which is interesting to do for the technical stuff, is just calculate the distance between the most, excluding the goalkeeper, the most your player most close to your goal compared to the player most far away or more close to the opponent's goal. So you have the meters, and then the most widest players. So that will give you the dimensions, and then you can calculate as well how you train in the training, and see if they match the intensity of small-sided games on each different phases. So those are quite analysis if you're profiling of the game model, because the tricky part is you need to understand the profile of your game model, then to prescribe training as well. If your game model stretch too much, if your team
then you should train in wider areas, and they should not
exactly. So there are teams that are more compact. Then
this is clearly a rabbit hole, because you're talking about just the physicality of stuff. Because if you're playing in small-sided games, there's a technical and tactical component that you have to take into account, which is very specific to small-sided games that you won't get in a wide area. So if you want to, do a warm-up or work on technicality or work on the ability to think fast on play or on two touches or pass on two touches, whatever, then small-sided games, it's a more efficient way to do that. You cannot only train on wider areas. But of course, if you're going to take into account your game model, then it's again what you were saying before. You need to make sure that players are exposed to what they're supposed to do in the match, and either tactically
that is the key. I think that is what's going to differentiate the traditional approach, which is a physical coach that goes to the training and does 20 minutes of warm up with no context, just physical, or a physical coach that goes to the training and starts to build up the game model with the coach. So even if you want to warm up with a pass, you can already make that pass related to the game model. So it's having a very strong bound connection, discussing with the head coach and the technical staff, so you can basically make the fitness training more related to the things that the game model needs, with still touching all the metrics that we need. So if we would argue how much is the training load per week that the player needs, this is not a totally different topic per se, or not a different topic, but a very deep topic, which is how much the training load that the player needs on a weekly basis to be match fit. And definitely there are many things that they should reach. And
babies inbound.
And you can reach them more analytically or more contextualized.
Again, we're going back to the same thing that I was saying before, which is how to get the biggest bang for the buck. If you can do a warm-up, or you can do your physical work already, take into account your technical stuff, your tactical game model, your technical capabilities. Of course, it's you're more efficient for every minute that you're working, and I guess this is what we're all striving for. Because again, what we're saying, this idea of the strength coach that just goes there to do the warm up and to do the extra runs or the analytical physical stuff, which has its place. But if you can do everything more integrated, if you can again get the biggest bang for the buck by doing exercises that already integrate everything, of course, this is going to be better for everybody. Listen, let's just close up here because it's already 1 hour, and I don't want to take
You
too
want
much
to
of
answer
your
to
time.
them some
Yeah,
questions
yeah, I
that
have 2 questions here. Nelson is asking about the staff member that does the tagging and works sports code for the analysis and the GPS, are you using sports code to tag the game phases, or do you cross this information with somebody else?
So I had to do both from time to time. Right now, I have the technical. I always had ask for the technical staff to do it because what is the game phase for one technical staff may not be the
Different,
same
yeah.
for the other.
Is it when
So
you lose the ball? Is it 5 seconds after you lose the ball? Yeah, yeah.
even more. The question is, when are you in defensive organization after the transition? So it's
Right.
sometimes very arguable. So usually I tried that they do it. If nobody is doing it, I try to do my own. So at least I can have this
So you
discussion.
watch the game and
Yeah. So
you cut the game.
yeah. So I did it. Imagine I had a tablet. I was watching the game, and I would just press off, like offensive organization, defensive organization.
Right.
So it's just a simple on and
And
off.
then you go to your GPS and then you put the periods.
Yeah, basically that will create a timeline. Then you have the raw data, and you just make sure that the kickoff
Crossing.
of both are together, and then you can do the accumulated. Yes.
Right.
So this is a little bit tricky. So there are some brands that are very helpful on this. I know, for instance, Catapult is very easy to integrate data. Or other brands, I do it right now. I have to do it with Python or even SQL. Also, you can do it with SQL. But yes, so definitely if you don't have a brand that helps you a bit on this one, it could be tricky.
Right. Victor is asking here, how do ground conditions, wet versus dry grass, affect GPS metrics? Do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, well, fortunately or unfortunately, where I am playing, where in Mexico, we have all different conditions. So our own stadium, usually it's above 30 degrees, so 35, 40 even. So very hot, very low humidity. So which makes hot with high humidity, it's worse. So it creates even 60, 50 degrees real feel. But the way that we are playing is a little bit low humidity, but very hot. So definitely we can see if it is too hot, some players suffer more than the others, and the metrics go a little bit lower. On wet dry grass, yes, of course. So they change their boots sometimes. So from soft ground to firm ground, it spends, and then you can see like if they are not so used to firm ground boots, to soft ground boots, the lower legs start to feel a little bit more complaints. So yes, we do have that into consideration. Although the majority of the practical applications is more related to hydration and ingestion of food, because we cannot do many acclimate training because we play 2 matches every week on many different areas, so we cannot go there 1 month before to do accommodation training. So definitely the best thing we do is we start to supplementate the supplementation, and in our case we have the problem that we cannot really change the hour of training to make to be a little colder. Let's say we already train early in the morning, and it's what we got. But definitely something that impacts
Makes a
the
difference,
value.
yeah.
And I have a tag. So I have a tag for each match, the temperature. so we know when we compare how the temperature is affecting.
Take this into account. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nelson is also. I think the last. It's a comment here. Nelson says, "I always compensate analytically because at least in the technical periodization standard, there are a lot of things that fail in physical terms. A lot of coaches are not this dynamic due to ignorance." Yeah. Well, listen. The idea is, as I was saying with Katarina the other day, you need, if you want to get your stuff done, you need to explain why you're doing it. If you do it with the player, it helps. If you do it with the coach, it helps as well. So if you try to give your feedback to the coach and present the data on your feedback, I guess most more modern coaches will take that into account, even if they say they don't. I think everybody wants the best for their players. It's the same thing. So it's part of being able to know how to analyze the data and know how to show them that what makes sense or doesn't make sense, because I guess what the coaches wanted for their athletes to be better. So, but yeah, I understand. We all understand what you're going through, Nelson. So yeah, I know it's part of being a physical coach.
Yeah, I mean, one of the skills that we don't discuss sometimes that often, but is one of the most important skills is the soft skills, the capability that we have to educate, have the buy-in. And I have to say, one thing that my experience, because I've been always working more from the club's lens than as a fitness coach from the technical stuff. I already did it, but the thing is, when you talk with the technical staff, there are coaches where you have a better relationship than the others, and definitely that is a big difference in the end. So if you have the buy-in, if the technical staff really understands the way that you try to communicate, the way that you try to do things, it's going to be much easier and smooth. The other times where the technical staff is much more closer, where it's basically we don't match because I have my own personality. There are people with their own personality, and definitely I won't match with everyone. So I have to understand that sometimes with this technical stuff, I need to communicate different. I even sometimes I you know what? I'm going to try to delegate the information. I'm going to try that someone else takes the information to the technical coach, to the head coach, because I know that the buy-in that he has from this other guy is going to be better than the buy-in that he has from me, just because our communication is not as good as it could be, but definitely is something that I won't match with everyone. That's the thing that
This is life, right?
learn.
Anyways, listen, we're done here. Thank you very much, Gonçalo. Listen, thank you very much for your insights. Guys, before we finish, I just want to say something. We're officially opening, or officially announcing that we're going to launch a GPS course, which is all of this stuff we're talking about. I know some of you guys there already done some of our courses. We're going to launch a new course. We don't have a date yet, but it's going to be in the next couple of days. I'm going to send you here this pre-subscription, all right? You can get an early access for the course if this is something that you're interested in. Log in, give us your email, and you're going to get the early access for the course, which is going to be out in the next couple of days. Okay, pay attention to this, and thank you very much for everybody that stayed there, everybody that's listening to this after the conversation has happened. Thank you very much for your attention as well. And log into the site, give us your subscribe your email to check if this is something you're interested in, because you're gonna get some news pretty soon. Okay, Gonçalo, thank you again very much, everybody. Good evening, and see you next time, which I hope is gonna be in a couple of days. See you guys.